Welcome, everybody, to another webinar from Modern Firm. And today, we've got Peggy from CPN Legal, and we're going to be talking about KPIs for law firms. This is like data and what to track so that you can make good decisions. Peggy and I met last year, actually, at CleoCon, and it sort of instantly hit it off and realized very quickly that we had several clients in common. So it just seemed like a really great fit. And lo and behold, the clients that use Peggy's services tend to be more organized and make good decisions. So we had a nice chat there and kept in touch. And once we started our webinar series this year, she was one of the first people we reached out to. So Peggy owns CPN Legal. They do bookkeeping, payroll, invoicing, and KPIs and consulting around that for law firms. And they work with over 400 firms. They've got 40 people on their team. It's a really slick company, and she's got a lot of information to share about how firms grow and the decisions that go into that, and how the numbers make those decisions easier. So today, I'm about to turn it over to Peggy, but as a reminder, if you have questions as we go along, there'll be a little time for Q&A at the bottom, so you can use the Q&A button in Zoom to launch a question our way. And we also have a few polls that we're going to be sending out with just some questions about what's going on at your firm and what software you use, KPIs, things like that. So pay attention to those and drop an answer in to keep the conversation going. So with that, Peggy, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Brandon. And thanks for the introduction. If you guys want to learn more about me and what we do, I'll let you head to our website and I'll spend time here talking about KPIs. Why we're here, I want to take this time to start with this statement that KPIs are only as useful as decisions they drive. So if you're going to take the time to capture the data, you're committing to using that data to help you build a better business. And KPIs are the tools that you're going to use to help you make decisions, but also make you drive action in your business. And today I want to get practical on how you can just make a start identifying or learn how to identify how to better understand your business and take actions by picking what KPIs you should be measuring. And our goal for you is to leave here with 2 to 3 action items you want to make based on what's important to your business. Every law firm is different, and law firms are going to have different KPIs they want to track depending on what stage they are in their business. Did we want to do any polls,
Yeah, I
Brendan?
just sent it out.
Okay, cool. Um,
Okay, so yeah, Peggy, those will come in, and we can keep going there.
Oh, yeah. So our agenda today is we are going to talk about what are KPIs. We're going to keep it simple and why it matters to your business, and what you can do with these KPIs, which you can track, and how to get started. And we're going to go through a couple examples of KPIs, marketing KPIs, and some operational KPIs. So KPIs are, I'm a data person from my first career. So data is always on my mind when I look at firms' finances and firms' businesses, because data tells stories and it holds many answers to what's going on in a business. And KPIs will lead you to data-driven decision making. But you just don't need data to do KPIs. You need really good data. Um, and when you go down the road of starting to track KPIs and you start peeling back the onion to get the data, you're going to come to this realization that you don't have good data. And that's okay, because your KPI project is then going to start as a data cleanup project. And we've done that many times with law firms. To get to the start of a KPI project, we've had to clean things up. But at least you're starting. That's all that matters. For example, in QuickBooks, are you correctly categorizing all of your marketing expenses? We use that data for some KPIs. Are you using a CRM system to accurately capture and track leads to your client journey? Is your law practice management software set up to capture key data to build your KPIs? So those are all the questions to start asking yourself. So what to track? We're going to go through 4 areas of KPIs, how they're subdivided. I'm going to start with client marketing related metrics, which is obviously tracking new clients, conversions, client acquisition costs, which channels work best for you, where referrals are coming from. And then I'm going to go down to your people. If you're a true solo, this really isn't going to be applicable to you. But if you're a true solo, you're going to grow. And one day this is going to be applicable to you because your people that work for you are the face of your firm. And a lot of times the people that work for you are driving your KPIs. So are they doing it right? Is intake through the end of the engagement? There's a lot that happens there, and you want to make sure it's being done correctly. And then we're going to talk about productivity metrics, billable hours, utilization rates, realization collection rates. And then finally, financial metrics. Revenue by practice area, revenue by attorney, profitability. There's a lot we can do here. One of the big ones I really like to focus on is flat fee profitability. There's a unique way to get to that. And a lot of you probably do flat fee matter billing. And we're going to look at net income growth. Maybe you do want to grow. Let's track the growth so we know if we're growing. So those are the things we're going to look at. Oops, sorry. Did I do my cursors? Why it matters. You can certainly continue with your business, never running or implementing KPIs. And you can run your business with blinders on and still make money. But the question is, will you sustain any abrupt changes that can happen? Um, you probably won't, but you can. But KPIs force you to regularly review your business and spot trends that might be red flags that you would otherwise miss. So when we look at the why it matters boxes, we're going to ask our questions, what practices bring in the most revenue? Identify what's working and what's not working. Maybe you have 5 different practice areas and one of them doesn't even bring any revenue in. Maybe that's when you want to take off your website and focus on marketing the other 4. What lawyer is the most profitable or brings in the most revenue, has the best utilization rate? Maybe you want to give him bonuses, find a way to bonus that lawyer, reward him a little bit better. Where are your leads increasing or decreasing? Do you even know if your leads are increasing or decreasing? Are we tracking that? That's an important one to track because that's the top of your funnel. If you think about the marketing funnel, that's your business. You got to have clients. Are you getting enough consultations each month? How much revenue do you need to collect monthly to cover your expenses? We call that your monthly nut. I don't know if many of you have heard that term, but your monthly nut is if you look at your monthly fixed expenses, that number has to equal the amount of money you're bringing in every month. Anything over that is extra money you can use to reinvest into your business or you take out of the business and pay yourself. But that monthly nut is a really important number to keep your eye on. And then we look at billing realization rates. But all of this leads to having control of your business and confidence in your business and reduce uncertainty in running your firm. Know your numbers, know your outcomes, sleep better at night.
Yeah, Peggy, I would jump in here too
Yeah,
and
yeah.
really second the sleeping better at night because we are working with so many clients that are growing, right? And they didn't go to school for this; they're just starting, and this is what they're doing, and it starts
Okay.
off with 1 or 2 people, but then yeah, as soon as you start getting more, especially more people into the mix, things just get so much more complicated, and you do start worrying like I got payroll to make. I've got families depending on me. It's more, it's more than just me. And as you get control and keeping track of like the right numbers, it does really just take so much stress away because you know what you need to do and you have like very clear way to see what's working, what isn't.
Yeah. One of the reports that we include in the KPI tracking is cash flow analysis. Um, your cash flow analysis is going to help you look forward to 4 weeks out to see if you got enough money to cover that payroll. What are your expenses coming up? What is your projected revenue? And you can get that projected revenue by tracking your marketing KPIs. That's where we pull in those projected revenue, is by pulling in those marketing KPIs. It works really well. Otherwise, you don't know what's coming in. I'm sorry, I'm playing around with my little cursor here. Um, okay. Now we're going to talk about the KPI journey and get into a little bit deeper here. So adding on to the saying, you can't improve what you don't measure, and you can't measure what you don't track. Tracking bad data will just yield bad decisions. And I'm going to say this a lot because it's really important to me that you start with good data before you go down the track of doing KPIs. KPIs is time consuming, you guys. I'll be honest with you. It's not something to take lightly. It's something you really have to commit to building the beginning of of identifying KPIs, committing to getting the data for your KPIs, building the reports for KPIs, and then committing to reviewing that data every month. It takes time, so you're going to have to build that into your system. But I don't want you to waste your time by starting with bad data. So let's walk through the categories of KPIs as law firm owners you need to navigate, questions you need to ask, and how to get those answers to drive your actions. So categories of KPIs. If you reflect on how your business works, you need clients first, and then you need people to do the work, and then you need to do the work, and then you get paid. So that's how I like to think about KPIs and the funnel of a lawyer's business. We build the funnel by getting clients first, doing the work, getting people doing the work, and getting paid. All right. I always say law firms are the simplest business in the world. They're so simple. Don't overcomplicate it. All right. You get clients, you do the work, and you get paid. So right now, if you're a true solo, but you're here and you want to grow, you're soon going to have people like Brendan talked about. You're going to have people working for you. You can't grow without people. I'm a perfect example of that. Once I started hiring my first employee, something happened. The doors opened, the windows opened, and all of a sudden my business started growing. Um, People are going to factor into your KPIs. They're going to drive your KPI data. So you have to invest in those people. I just mentioned that because they're going to be important to your KPI process. Um, clients, clients and marketing. This is how well you're serving your people. Not just winning matters, but building trust, loyalty, and long-term relationships, right? For a small firm, this might mean are you bringing in the right clients? Are they satisfied enough to come back and refer other clients to you? If the answer is no, then no matter how strong the legal work is, no matter how good the work you do, the business won't grow in a sustainable way. People on the people side, people rise and fall. The firms rise and fall on talent. They're the face of the firm. Are they doing it right? Did you train them right? Did you invest in them? On the financial health side, do you have enough new cases coming in to generate cash flow? Looking at those leads, looking at those conversion rates. And does the cash reflect good realization rates? It's one thing to get work done, to bring in new cases and do the work and bill them out. But if you don't have good realization rates, you're not going to have good revenue coming in. You're going to be working and losing money possibly. And operationally is how smoothly and efficiently our case is moving through your system from intake to billing. Getting this right doesn't just save money, it creates a better client and employee experience. And the better the client experience is, the better chance you're going to have of referrals. Brenda, do you have anything to add there?
Well, I can certainly pile on the importance of the KPIs that are on the marketing side of things because there's so much data available that we can use to inform decisions, to feedback into advertising campaigns, and so we build a lot of things into our marketing efforts to track that, but certainly getting sort of closing the loop with the firm and when we're getting information back about which cases are being the most profitable, the most enjoyable to work on. Like we can really tailor and make a lot of things. We can really steer the ship of the marketing campaign based on the data.
That's
So it's the KPI sort of move it from like the seat of the pants test, like, yeah, it feels good, like the phone's ringing,
yeah,
to like, okay, the phone's ringing with the right calls, the right people are contacting me. I'm getting, reviews coming in off on my Google page. Like it just sort of the data really helps inform and make better decisions. And then it all just feeds on itself
yeah,
to improve.
yeah. So the better your clients are capturing KPI marketing data to feed back to you, the better the website can perform and they can keep
Mm-hmm.
growing. I love it. It's a full cycle, right?
Yeah.
I love it. Oh, oh, sorry, my cursor keeps messing around here. Okay, let's go into the last one here. Get goal setting here. From questions we ask to choosing KPIs to track, KPIs will inform us how we're doing against our goals or targets. So and avoid misdiagnosing things. And that actually comes up a lot here. This slide is going to show you how we translate some of those questions you asked about your business into concrete KPIs that will help you understand whether you're on track with things and what to do to take action. Um, One of the things people ask a lot is when we're starting with KPIs is a lot of our clients are solo small firm clients don't have anything to compare it to because they're starting new, right? So you've never collected data before, so you don't know what your current client acquisition cost is. So you're going to start tracking it, but you don't have anything to compare it to. That's okay. All right. We call that you're going to build your baseline. So don't let that stop you. You're going to take that first year to build a baseline, and then you're going to use that first year as your baseline as you keep collecting that data for the next years going on. So think about it as investing in your baseline data that first year as you start building your KPI data so you can watch trends over the next few years. So that first year becomes an investment in KPI data so that you can see trends in your business moving forward.
And
Um,
Peggy, I'll add there too that the trends are so important because so many areas of law have a seasonality to them, whether
yeah,
it's just people going away for vacations in the summer, not filing divorce, for divorce close to the holidays, things, there can just be all these ebbs and flows, economic things. And when you track these over time, it's not just like this, oh, all right, we're good. I hit my nut this month. It's when things start to shift or aren't quite looking right, you then have that data to reference back to and like, oh yeah, that's right. It's spring break week. Like everybody's on vacation. Like that, this
yeah.
happens every year. So
That is
that's
so true. I love it. I thought it's a great point. And the other thing about cash flow that you brought it up, if you know and you're watching your trends, and if you're estate planning, I think estate planning lawyers are and family law lawyers are probably hit by this more like Christmas time, summer vacations when it drops, right? You can forecast a drop in revenue ahead of time and be prepared for that if you're watching your cash flow and watching your trends. So we want to be prepared. So take for clients, for example. If you're wondering if you should invest more in marketing, one KPI you should be looking at is client acquisition cost. If client acquisition cost is rising, but referral rates are low, the story might not be about spending more. It might be more about strengthening client satisfaction in referrals first. But on the other hand, if your consultation to client conversion rate is low, the issue may be intake process, not marketing spend, right? These metrics together help you avoid solving the wrong problem. I'm sure you see that a lot, Brendan.
Oh yeah. We'll see. Yeah, especially like on intake, and especially before firms start to build out like that real intake process, and they're maybe handling like all the work and all the phone calls on their own, and we can see, okay, like leads are coming in, but they're hitting voicemail, and then
Yeah,
those, they're not converting as much. So
yeah,
yeah, it does let you know where to start. Like, okay, we solved maybe the marketing problem. Now we got to solve the intake problem, or we
yeah,
solved the intake problem. Now we got to solve the getting the work done problem. So it's yeah, helps you focus on the right spot.
yeah, and know where to go. So that's why, and I have a great graph to show you guys as I go through some of these slides on client acquisition costs. Um, For people, think about the classic question. We get this question all the time. When is it time to hire my first lawyer? When should I break through and do that? Um, the answer to that question is looking at utilization rates and capacity. And can you tell whether your team is at sustainable levels currently, right? Um, I say avoid the knee-jerk reaction to hire. If you're not watching your utilization rates of your current lawyer, then you may not need to hire. The issue may be that your current lawyer isn't being efficient and with his time and his utilization rates are too low, right? If you were tracking those utilization rates with good data, you could sit down and have a conversation with that lawyer about that issue and bring those utilization rates up before you just start going and hiring. We did that with our own business. We did a project to increase utilization rates before I kept knee-jerk hiring, and it actually helped smooth out our hiring process. Um, so keep that in mind, and we'll talk about how to get utilization rates out there. Um, so on the financial health, what are some KPIs you might want to track? Profit per case per lawyer. What lawyers are most profitable lawyers in your system? Revenue by month. Are you tracking revenue by month? To Brendan's point, finding where your low spots are in revenue, right? Do you have trends where revenue is going to drop every year in revenue by month? Are you tracking how much you're billing each month, right? If you see a drop in your billed amounts in April, you know you're going to feel that in collections in 2 months from now, right? So tracking how much you bill is an important KPI to keep track of. And this one, forecasting, putting a budget in place and comparing that to actuals. Budgets are a scary word, I think, for a lot of people, but they don't have to be complicated. Budgets can be simple, and just doing the exercise of putting a budget together again makes you start thinking about your business and going down that path. Um, the one about flat fee profitability is a huge one for me to think about how you're going to do flat fee profitability. When you talk about flat fee profitability, it's not just about dividing, what you charge for that flat fee based on what the actual hour value was going into that case. We actually bring in real data from payroll. What did you pay? What was the salary of that lawyer? What were the benefits you paid to that lawyer? We bring in that external data to get the true cost of that lawyer's time for that flat fee to get true flat fee profit on that case. So the true takeaway here is KPIs aren't just numbers, they're signals, right? Sometimes they're good signals for the most part, and sometimes they're bad signals. Um, but if they're bad signals, we got to take corrective action to improve the business. And that's what we're here to talk about. You want to avoid misdiagnosing your business. And misdiagnosing happens a lot, I think, on the marketing side. So I'm going to talk a little bit about getting started. Um, by the way, when I talk about getting started with KPIs, I'm going to talk about SOPs, standard operating procedures. I don't know how many of you use these or are starting to use these, but my rule of thumb is before you start KPIs, you start with standard operating procedures. Once you identify what KPIs you want to track, write a standard operating procedure that's behind that KPI data. Okay, maybe it's your intake process. Do you have a standard operation process in place that details your whole intake process? Do you have a standard operating procedure on how you set up new matters in your law practice management system? Create that SOP because that SOP is going to drive how well data is collected, right? And how well people are doing their job. It also gives you a chance to really analyze how well you guys are doing things in your business. Once you sit down and really put down an SOP, which is basically a checklist, you're going to find you're not doing things so well, and it's going to actually change the way you do things. So that's a good exercise in itself before you start doing your KPI tracking. Um, and the other thing is sitting here listening to me now, if you would have started collecting data a year ago, think about the things you would know by now. You'd know the quality of your current client relationships, the effectiveness of your client services, your lead conversion rates, your return on investment of marketing investments. You'd know more about your capacity, average case turnaround time. And financially, you would know more about your profit margins, revenues per lawyer, and billing realization rates. A lot of good things are going to come out of here. Start small. I want you to think about picking 3 to 5 key metrics that directly affect your goals or your targets or areas of your business that you're curious about. What do you want to know more about? Choose your tools. I'm a big proponent of using software because that's my background, obviously, but we want to make sure that you're investing in good tools to get good KPI data to grow your business. All right. Every business needs a solid foundation in order to grow upon. So are you using law practice management software? Do you have financial pack, like are you using QuickBooks online and are you using a CRM system? Those are questions you need to ask yourself. The problem with using a spreadsheet to track leads and conversions and all that kind of stuff is so error prone, it leads to bad data. And it's not good data to rely upon. So I throw that out there as a warning. And then we're going to set up tracking and reporting. So after you collect your data and you get it stored and we export it out to Excel, we're going to build reports and create simple little dashboards so you can use those to keep your eye on, create graphs. But all that data is going to come from different sources. So keep that in mind. And then you got to set time to review your KPIs, and whether it's monthly or weekly, but you have to commit and be accountable for tracking those reports that you build and looking at them. And actually taking the time, if you've got other attorneys or paralegals, more attorneys in your firm, bring them into the discussion because in the end, those attorneys are actually driving the results of some of your KPIs. And if you bring them in to talk about your business, they become a little bit more invested in the success of your business. So it's a good thing in the end. And then after you review your data, you can take action and get things done. So let's go through some real examples here. Since it all starts with client, all my KPIs are going to start with marketing KPIs first. We're going to look at client acquisition costs, lead conversion rates, and and when we start there with this data, it actually has a domino effect of actually creating building data for other KPIs, which I'll show you how that works. This list here is a list of other common KPIs that a lot of our solo firms attack first. When I say pick 3 to 5 simple KPIs, these are simple KPIs. So first thing you got to ask when you're looking at KPIs is where's the data? Where's this data for my KPI tracking going to come from? For this marketing KPI, we're going to start with financial software. We're going to use data from your CRM system, and we're going to use data from your law practice management system. So 3 sources of data here. On the financial software side, we are a huge advocate of using financial software to begin with, whether it's QuickBooks Online or Xero or I don't know what else you would use. Those are the 2 common ones. I know Soho has a built-in one, but the main point here is when you build your chart of accounts in QuickBooks, I'll use that as an example. Your chart of accounts drives how you report on your profit and loss statement, right? And you're looking at an example here. We go and subdivide what you're spending on advertising and marketing into sub-accounts. We don't let that marketing spend sit in one as a lump sum in one account because you can't dissect the data that way. You have to subdivide that marketing spend into sub-accounts in your P&L. We need to know how much of that marketing spend went to Google Ads, went to website hosting, why marketing there. Maybe you have a marketing consultation. Maybe you sponsored the Little League baseball team. Maybe you spend money on Google Ads and Facebook ads. That's how you have to set up your P&L to capture that data so that we can have good data to actually give you client acquisition cost accurately and referral information accurately.
Yeah, and Peggy, we discussed this a bit yesterday too, and yeah, what I had learned, so we just worked with some financial people this year to improve how we organize just our own accounts. Is yeah, really anything that you want to be making a decision on needs to be tracked in your P&L. So,
Yeah,
right, like you might have some things grouped together that you don't care about, like your membership to the chamber and sponsoring the little league. It's like, okay, great, that just goes under business development. It could be sort of like your pool account. But yeah, you might be really interested in whether yeah Google Ads is working better than like your print advertising, and so those things should be tracked, separately. Um,
yeah,
but on the flip side, which is the problem that we had too many sub accounts, and so you get to the end of the year, and we had like there was maybe an account on our profit and loss that only had like $5 in it. It was like, well,
yeah,
okay, you don't need that account. It's not going to make a decision about that. So it's
right.
sort of striking that balance for just where you should have a line item for things that you want to be just, where you need the number to make a decision.
You need to be practical. Um, the other sub account that's not listed here is online directories like Avo or Super Lawyers, right? A lot of clients use those. We do use sub accounts for those as well. Does your website do, are you able to tell if they came to a lawyer's website from one of those sites?
Yeah, so that's a
Oh,
helpful thing on our end is we can
perfect.
track, referral sources. So we can see whether or not you're tracking it in your P&L, we can see through the online marketing tracking, where what channel they're coming in through, what website referred, what advertising platform did they come through. If it was an advertising platform, you can even get data back further, like what specific campaign
Okay.
drove them, or what ad or what keywords were searched for when that person came through. So get a lot of really granular data.
Yeah. And that's going to tie back, guys, to when you're doing your intake and you're going to ask, how'd you find us? Right. And I know it's hard to always get that out of prospects when you're on the phone call, but if you get somebody that can be kind of specific, oh, I was on Super Lawyers or I was on the Avo site, that is a piece of data you want to collect in your CRM system so that we can report on that piece of data and compare it to what you're spending on those. It's just kind of a domino effect thing, right? Um, Side note here, if your P&L is not set up like this, guess what? We've got a cleanup project, right? We got to get your P&L set up to capture your marketing data in sub accounts. And it's not hard to do. So keep that in mind. All right. The next thing is we're going to talk about your CRM software. So from intake, there's things that need to be able to be tracked. All right. I don't know how many of our listeners here are using a CRM system, Brandon?
We had about half, and most were on Clio.
Okay. Okay, Cleo Grow. And then some of you are just maybe not using anything or not there yet, right?
Right.
Um, okay. Hopefully one day you get there because it's a good system to have. Um, it's it's invaluable software, and I only say that from my own experience. I could not have grown our business the way we've grown it without having CRM software to help us with tracking our leads and converting them to clients. But I'll get off that chair right now. Um, from a KPI standpoint, when we do our KPI reporting, it's really hard to do marketing KPIs right without a good CRM system. Um, we've tried to use data that people have been keeping in web and spreadsheets, but it's sporadic, it's not accurate, and it's really hard to do and give you good data. So we don't do that. But your website platform can capture sometimes, Brendan, right, and report data. If you
Right.
don't have a CRM system, you can get some data out of there, right?
Yeah, we can get a lot of data sort of up until the client is handed off to the firm, to start doing the intake and the work. So, again, we can track where they're coming from. Clients can report back to us whether or not it was, a valuable lead. Were they on point or not? Was this a, misfire?
Okay.
But then once it gets beyond that point, then that's really where the firm's internal systems and like CRM software are taking over.
Okay.
And yeah, it is important to have a system because it's, even just intake, it's complex, that you have the phone call, maybe a follow-up phone call, a conversation with them, and then there's a process of, maybe it's a paid consultation, maybe it's not. Then there's a retainer agreement or some sort of, representation agreement. And those are, just to get a client signed up can be anywhere from like 2 to 10 steps,
Yeah.
and it can fall apart, it can fall apart at any point. And so it's important to know
Yeah.
a lot of the knee jerk reactions. Well, they're not signing up. It's like, well, maybe it was where in the process did they fall apart? Was it when they got the retainer agreement, or was it some uh, other step? So
Yeah.
it's important to track that. And CRM software is great for that, for just taking your potential new clients through the steps of your intake so that you can see where things stall
Oh,
out or find
it's
success.
invaluable. It's visually, it's in front of you. It's a visual representation of what's going on. Actually, one of my next note is the best advice I can give is to develop an SOP for your intake process, right? Document how you do your intake process and document it and train your intake people really well on your intake process, okay? So that they're doing it consistently in the way you want it done because they're the face of your law firm, okay? Um, so what does your CRM system need to capture in order to get good marketing KPIs? The sources, where they come from, if they were referred by someone. Sources, by sources, I mean like internet search, Google, website inquiry, a professional relationship, Facebook, maybe it was a lawyer referral, a campaign. If it was referred by a certain person, that's where you want to capture that name, that lawyer's name. So you can capture how many lawyers, what lawyers are sending you good cases and what lawyers are sending you okay cases. Um, we want to track leads that led to consultations, consultations that led to being hired, and the value of those cases. Now, I know that's just an estimate, but it's good to have that estimate. So this is where we get to projected revenue, right? In your pipeline, we want to know what's your projected revenue so that we can help forecast revenue, which helps forecast, can I afford that to hire somebody? So that value of case is an important one to capture so we can report on it. And then once that lead is hired and it now lives in your law practice management software, if you use Clio Grow, you hit that little button, convert it to Clio Manage. Now all that data you collected in Grow is now in Clio. We got to make sure we're bringing over that referral source. We got to track inside that practice management software what practice area it is, and then from there we're going to track the billed amount, the collected amount, how many write downs were done, discounts made. So now the data lives in your law practice management software. That data is also fed into QuickBooks eventually. So remember that there's data in QuickBooks that eventually we're going to pull into KPIs as well. So it's definitely a loop. Oh, the other things that I'll mention here is that's important to keep track of, and I know it doesn't happen a lot, but the open date of a matter is always set because somehow the system always defaults to an open date. The date that never gets put in, or very rarely gets put in, is that close date. Okay. And the close date is really important if you want to do a KPI that tracks your average case timeline. How long are cases taken? You need to have that close date put in there so that that KPI can be tracked. Here's a quick overview of some marketing KPIs, the possible ones we could track. Brendan, and your history, what do you find? If you're going to pick three of these, what would be your top three?
Yeah, I mean, you want new leads for sure. You want to know what they're costing and which channel is sort of delivering the best results. And then converting into clients. I
Yep.
think so those are the ones that just, is your money being well spent, and is it getting you clients that you want? So
Yeah. For
that's,
KPIs, I think those are good KPIs. Under the visibility engagement bucket there, website traffic, organic search, that's stuff that you guys are going to capture, right? And that can be
yeah,
looked at and
it,
tracked. Yeah.
right, right. And we capture that, and that's all, those sometimes they're important to see. They can show you like overall progress towards the campaign, but things are shifting so much online. For instance, like AI has been gobbling up a bunch of traffic, and Google just this week now is finally tracking traffic from AI sources. Before, it's just been like a total black hole. So traffic numbers can jump all over the place. At the end of the day, what really matters is the is it working for you? So
Okay. Okay. I think we already covered this, why marketing KPIs are difficult to track, so I'm not going to go over that again. I want to go into the client acquisition cost, how we getting that KPI set up. Um, we're going to go through the 4 steps here. We got to be focused on what we're after, which is client advance costs. Be curious. What affects this number? Think about what it is you want out of it. What the end goal is. What do you want to see? Is it growing over year? What's it look like over each month, each year? Where's the data coming from? We're going to pull it from 3 sources: QuickBooks, your CRM, and your law practice management software. Um, do you have a baseline you want to meet? What's your goal? What's that number? Your client acquisition cost. Do you want it to be $20 per client, $15 per client, $30 per client? Do you have a number in mind? And then we're going to look at creating those graphs to review on a regular basis. The data I'm going to show you is from a client that we did a few years ago. Um, that was real data. So I'm going to look at him. He actually invested money in his marketing and he's been tracking it for a while. We've been tracking it for a while. He spent about 6.5% of his income was spent on marketing. And again, that's data we pulled to QuickBooks. We actually like to see at least 3 to 4% of your income spent on marketing for solos. We don't like to see 1%. That doesn't show you're very serious about growing your business. So we really like to see a good number in that marketing spend on your P&L. Now, it might be that some of those marketing categories are not in the right GL account. Maybe they got put in a different account, which is why you want to review that. So when we look at where the data lives in Clio Grow, this is where we get leads with referral source, what leads led to consultation, and consultations to clients. All that data we pulled out of Clio Grow into an Excel spreadsheet. The data for marketing spend came out of QuickBooks Online, and we pulled that out of QuickBooks Online to know what's going on there. Tracking leads with referral sources is important because you want to know where first of all, what referral sources bringing in the most clients. And at the end of the year, you might want to send something to that referral source to thank them for bringing in that many clients. The leads to consultations is interesting. You're going to calculate how many leads turned into consultations, right? Get that percent. But also, you're going to track how many of those leads never became a consultation, which is like going to identify a possible intake problem, right? And you're also going to be able to get costs per lead, all right, which is a number not to lose sight of. When we're looking at client acquisition cost right now, you still want to know your costs per leads, all right, because you want to get those leads into consultations. And then we're going to look at total marketing spend, okay, which we talked about already. And here's some of the a couple of graphs to show you on these slides. Behind these slides, there is a lot of data hiding. And this is some of the data we pulled out. And now you're seeing different trend lines on here because we started collecting this data in 2023. His question here for this particular client had been he has been curious about his client acquisition costs. And he had a gut feeling that it was increasing, and had been watching it with these graphs. And when we dug into it a little bit more, he realized it was increasing at a higher rate than he expected it to increase. And then what he was able to uncover, if we go to the next screen, where's my cursor? The other thing he was seeing is his leads were dropping and his percent of leads to new clients were dropping. Now, there's a lot that can be read in here now that you're visually seeing this. If you would never see this and never look at it, you would never know it's happening, right? But now that it's visibly on paper and in front of you, can now have a conversation about this, right? And the conversation he was having in his head was that in 2025, he hired a new website company. And now he's thinking to himself, I have data to go back to my website company with and question their performance. Maybe they're doing something wrong, right? The other thing he could use this data with, remember, data drives decisions, which drives action. He can look at his intake process. Maybe there's something going wrong in his intake process that has to be improved. So this was a really good example of how to use data to help answer questions, drive decisions, and take action. And then the referral source one is also good data because he could find out where the money was coming from, who was sending them misfit clients and all kinds of stuff. So once you got data, like I said, it's a domino effect and it can become really fun to look at and analyze. Fun's probably a strange word, but I like doing that. So um, after you're done doing a KPI project, we look at what we learned. We learned as client advance cost was increasing, as leads and new clients were decreasing, and marketing spend was increasing. So we had impact, and we turned those impacts, those insights into action, and we addressed his new marketing company's performance and reviewed his intake process. So we looked at both of those for him. And by the way, your target for client acquisition costs depends on the type of law and return on investment per client. If a client is more valuable in the long run, you might be willing to spend more to find them. Um, but for solos, tracking leads and consultations is essential exercise because for many firms, that's your pipeline. That's the foundation of future cash flow. If you're not tracking that, you're running your firm with blinders on, basically, because you don't know what's coming down the pipeline. You don't know what your future cash flow is. So keep that in mind. Do you want me to stop here, Brendan, for questions?
Yeah, I've got a couple questions, pending. So yeah, I think that'd be a good point. Unless, yeah, what do you think? Unless you
Okay.
had another slide to cover.
I have a couple more slides, but they'll take a couple more minutes, but we can stop here before I go into the next one.
Sure, yeah. So the question number one we had was, how do we decide on the best CRM software? We were a small team. We use different platforms for different processes. Seems hard to evaluate which would be best. Do you have suggestions or advice? So, I have things
Um,
to offer, but Peggy, I'm wondering, you work with these all the times. Do you have some favorites in terms of best data?
um, I let whatever you're using for your law practice management software drive what CRM you're going to use because those two systems have to speak to each other. We have to be able to integrate those two systems to send data between them. Like Lawmatics speaks to Clio, Lawmatics speaks to um, my case. So, and Clio Grow obviously speaks to Clio. So you can send data between the two systems. The last thing you want to be doing is manually entering data in two places, getting data in one place and having to manually enter it in another place. So the first thing that we look at is what systems integrate together. That's my main criteria for evaluating the software is
Sure.
integrations, if
Yeah,
that
and
helps.
yeah, I think the integrations is huge, and so and we can get the website talking to just about anything, um, but for in terms of like getting new leads in, but then yeah, having those whatever systems you have, making sure they're seamlessly talking together is really important. So if you that's
Yeah.
great input. If you've already committed to a case management system, then you've really find a CRM that is going to talk to it. If you haven't decided on any of those things, and you're sort of like what do what do we do?
Yeah.
I think. It it's a bit pain like there's the popular ones out there, Clio, Smokeball, Lawmatics, those are like some really popular ones that really have a lot of development happening and growth. Um, but I think as painful as it is, it's important to one just sit through the demonstrations with the companies. Like
Ah,
they're solid companies. It's worth the hour to as a step one to meet with their salespeople and to go through the live demonstration. And they can usually pull up a firm that's similar to yours or a similar practice area so that you can see like how it all works. But then I think the second thing is many of you are part of discussion groups, practice area groups, local bar associations. You likely know somebody who's using these systems. So whichever one catches your eye, take them out to lunch and then have them show you their system so you can see what it was like to actually use it and have it be implemented in like real world. Because the demonstration you're going to get from the sales team is going to be polished and everything will be perfect. Uh, and then like I was sitting in with a client last week and I saw like in his Clio Grow, it was like a 12-step process rotating between three different people to like get a client signed up. And that's what works for them. But that's all, you're not going to see that on the demonstration, but that was what their real world implementation was. So I think it's important to get both those things because once you pick these systems, it's hard to change.
Yeah.
Your data is in there. It has historic, values. You can technically move them from one to another, but it's a pain. So it's really worth the upfront time to really vet them and meet with the salespeople and then see how it's used in real life with your friends, and then go from there. Question two. Some of us are old school and we don't use QuickBooks or things like it. We pay bills and keep a spreadsheet. How can this work without financial software?
Well, we'll have to manually type in the numbers into the KPI calculation spreadsheet. It can work, but you better have a really good tracking system in that spreadsheet to break out your marketing costs line by line. I'm not an advocate of that at all. It's very time consuming. But when you're keeping your manual spreadsheet and you're recording your expenses, you have to make sure you have on that spreadsheet, I hope that you're doing it in Excel, a line for each marketing spend and then a subtotal for the whole marketing column. Because just like I showed you on that slide, really set up Excel to have a line for each type of marketing. And when you record that expense, that check you're writing or that credit card you had, just make sure you put that dollar amount in that on that row, right? And add it to that row. So you're getting a total number of how much you spent on the website that month, or how much you spent on Google Ads that month, or Facebook ads, or marketing consultant. But
Yeah.
you can do it and get that number. And then when you're pulling your data to develop your reports, you got to pull that data out of your, I don't know, out of your CRM system. Does he have a CRM system?
Not sure.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Let's okay. Well, then we got real problems. Then I'm not sure we can get you there. To tell you the truth, I'll be perfectly honest with you. It's going to be really hard to do KPIs without financial software and without CRM software and without law practice management software. But to answer your question about the financial side of it, you can put financial data in an Excel spreadsheet and then manually add it to the Excel program that's building your reports. That report I showed about trend lines for client advance costs or client acquisition costs. But it's really hard to do if we don't have a CRM system with data in it as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if that helps, but
right. Yeah. And that's where on the marketing side, we can usually provide some data up at the front end about, especially well, with our main services, there's sort of either a line item for, work on the website, optimization, content, that sort of stuff, or there's a budget that's set for advertising. And so we can tie those in sort of a lead dashboard back to where they came from, and then from there, it has to be tracked somewhere to know, did they sign, did they ultimately sign up, how much did they pay, and so it's difficult without
my
that
question
software
to
to get too deep.
my 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 question back to that person would be in in the phase of his business, does he have many years left, or is he in a growth state? Is he in a growth stage of his business, or is he in a wind down stage of his business? Right. If you're in a growth stage of your business, then my suggestion to you is to invest in your business and get those softwares. If you're in a wind down phase of your business, then think about what you want your wind down to look like, and do you need to invest in them? That's something else to think about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we've done these at our own company. It's a process, to
Yeah.
get all this stuff going. So, um, What would be good? What would be good alternatives to QuickBooks? Do you have any favorites that are,
There's FreshBooks out there. QuickBooks is my favorite, so it's hard to say. There's not much else out there, to tell you the truth. For small businesses, FreshBooks,
and
S-
Clio has accounting integrated, right?
Clio Counting has Clio Counting integrated. Soho Suite has an accounting module, but it's not, I don't know much about it. Um, Really, the only one that comes to mind is FreshBooks, to tell you the
Yeah,
truth.
FreshBooks is pretty lightweight, pretty lean invoice. It grew up as an invoicing system, which we actually used for a little while. It's really pretty slick, lightweight, gets the job
Yeah,
done. And then they more recently added in the accounting side of it. And they've had a chance to grow that now for probably 5 or more years. So
yeah.
um, yeah, and
But
but yeah, for the accounting side, if it's just purely accounting, yeah, probably yeah, Zero X that's XERO
yeah,
is a
zero
popular one.
zero is not easy to learn. I will tell you that right now. I used to be a zero consultant and it was tough. That person that asked that question, I'd be curious to know what is driving them away from looking at QuickBooks, which
Yeah,
is the most used software, even by lawyers. If that lawyers are using QuickBooks, we've
yeah,
got over 2,500 clients that use QuickBooks. So
yeah.
I'd be
Is it like
curious.
me?
She
Is it
she can
like me? It's
email me
just
separately. I'm
sure.
I'm
Yeah,
always
yeah,
curious. Yeah,
yeah. So yeah, it could be like me, and it just be general annoyance with
yeah,
with QuickBooks as a company. So.
yeah.
Um,
I know.
So Peggy, we're about at time. If we could either call it here, or if you had a couple more slides to go through, people can hang
I
on.
had a couple more slides that we're going to talk about utilization. I don't know if these guys are going to get copies of this presentation.
They will, yeah, we
Um,
will send out a copy of everything, and this is all recorded. So yeah, if you want to
yeah,
wrap it up, we can do that.
this last one was going to go through an exercise we did with a firm that was going through a growth stage, um, and things were not flowing smoothly. Processes were chunky, hiring was chunky, had no documentation. He wanted to build a smoother processes and find out if he was getting utilization out of his staff. And in the end, we actually went through. Actually, what was interesting on him, we found out that we were going to build a KPI system that affected all four boxes, believe it or not. Remember all those four boxes I had up there? Marketing, people, operational, and financial. When we started digging into what we were going to track, remember we had conversations, we looked at data, we ended up tracking KPIs that affected a lot of things in his business. And this is an example of the Monday morning reports he used with his staff every Monday morning. We pulled this data in. There's a lot of data behind this system here. He uses Clio. This data came from Clio. But what we were able to do here is he had a utilization target for each of his attorneys. This Joe Burrow's target was 78%. Every week he got a report showing his utilization. This utilization was 65%, so he was below his utilization. It also tracked case resolution time, how many days open each case was. From this data, because they were adding close dates to their system when they closed a case, because up here in that first line, you'll see that two cases were closed that week. We were able to track how long each case was taken to get through the system. So we had average length of case time. We're also looking at, if you look at that last line, the days open. This was a kind of a red flag tool or a place to ask questions as to why a case that's been open 25 days only had 2 hours built to it, right? So this particular graph led to a great tool to use for his Monday morning meetings to keep the cases moving more smoothly through the system to improve his client engagement, right? And improve efficiency within his firm, get better utilization out of his lawyers, which ended up smoothing out a lot of things in his system, in his
Yeah,
law
and
firm.
I'll say, so we do a similar thing. We have, oh, geez, I don't even know how many things we track at our company now across the various departments. Probably 50 things that get tracked. And yeah, the analogy I give is it is sort of like it's like flying a 747. There's a lot of moving pieces to your business and things that keep it, in the air. And the KPIs really let you know um, where to target your conversations,
Yeah.
and so if something's starting to go wrong, and I think an important thing to communicate, especially if you're working with a team, is that the KPI being on or off target doesn't necessarily mean, especially if it's off target, doesn't necessarily mean that you're instantly jumping to that person to be, what's going on, like what's
Right.
wrong with you. It just lets you
Right.
know, it lets you know where to start to have the conversation because, right, like this case that you see here that only has 2 hours billed at 25 days could be for a lot of reasons. It could be that just something got delayed or something was held up, had nothing to do with the attorney. Or maybe the utilization rate was off because like this spreadsheet didn't account for them being on vacation for a couple of days, so it just lets you know where to focus the conversations to get insight into what's going on. So
Yeah. It's a good, to your point, it's a great conversation tool. That's what it's
yeah,
designed for. Yep. Yeah. So that's what I had for everybody, what we learned. And in summary, I'm a be curious person. Ted Lasso, any Ted Lasso fans out there, be curious. Start with good data, track and report are the three things you need to do.
yeah,
I hope you take it and do something with it out
yeah.
there.
Thank you, Peggy. Appreciate it. And as I said earlier, this is recorded, so we'll have it up on our YouTube channel. You get an email and a little takeaway from this within the next day or so. So no, I really really appreciate it, and thank you all for tuning in. Our webinar next month is going to be on selling your law practice. So as you were talking about the wind down phase and things to consider there. So Peggy, again, thank you so much, and yeah, and to everybody else, thank you, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks. Thanks, Brendan.